Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and I am so excited to be celebrating 10 years of meaningful conversations with you. As we step into our new primetime hour, it's such an honor to share this exciting new chapter with you. So whether you're starting your day out, headed to work, or listening from wherever you are, this hour is designed to bring you thoughtful dialogue, fresh insight, and inspiring stories so you can make every moment count. So thank you for being here with me today, and let's dive in. We're here today with special guest, Michael Upstone, who's here to share with us the science of frequency healing. What if frequency could play a role in supporting the body's natural ability to heal? I think many of us would be very interested in that, and I know I am. And today's guest is going to dive into just that. Michael Upstone has spent over 18 years working with some of the world's most advanced home health technologies. Driven by a passion for empowering as many people as possible to achieve tangible results, his books offer clear, practical guidance on integrating energy devices, detox protocols, nutrition, holistic approaches to health, and environmental awareness to support the body's natural self-healing potential. Michael serves as president of Keep Health Scientific Research, an international health research association based in Austria. So welcome to the show, Michael Upstone.
Thank you, Marianne. It's a pleasure to be here.
My goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your books. I think the best place to start is probably from the beginning. Let's start with your journey. I mean, you've had an 18-year journey in frequency healing. What inspired you on this path?
Well, I met a businessman, actually, who described a very strange situation to me. And this was in front of his secretary. And he described how he'd literally been bent double the week before, and his secretary had to drive him to a therapist, and how the therapist treated him on the arm, strangely enough, with a little device about the size of a small mobile phone, brushing his arm for about 8 minutes, and then said, "You're done now, you can straighten up." And his secretary absolutely howled with laughter, saying the look on his face was an absolute treat. So this was an introduction to a little device from the Russian space medicine program, actually, which came out of the 1980s. These devices were secret until about the year 2000, and then a financial crisis led to them being released. So I was so intrigued by this, I decided to contact the therapist and go down and experience it for myself, even though there was nothing wrong with me. So I had again a few minutes of treatment, and afterwards I arranged to meet him for coffee the next day. And he said, "What did you notice?" And I said, "Well, I looked at my digital watch, as we used to have in those days, and I said, I can differentiate between a 1 and a 7 for the first time in several years. So my eyesight had improved." And I had a little bit of insight into this area, but that was the start. At that point, I decided I had to have one of these devices. I got the training, which I think was a very good move. And that was just the start of a journey of treating around about 1,000 people over 18 years. And now dealing with multiple modalities and training doctors, clinicians, and new home users in a variety of energy healing devices.
So let's talk about frequency healing. What exactly is that?
That's a great question. Well, our bodies run on energy. Of course, we understand that the nervous system uses energy to communicate. It uses electrical energy. But a lesser known mechanism is called photobiomodulation, which is where the cells actually produce a kind of light called biophotons. And this was discovered by a guy called Fritz Albert Popp in 1976. So if we wind the clock forward, what we find is that the body often fails to heal due to lack of energy or poor coherence or communications. So if we structure the energy in the right way, whether it's electrical or light, and there are other forms that we use as well, then the body can respond unbelievably quickly in these situations. So basically, we're creatures that run on energy, and these devices effectively communicate with the body in terms of energy, recharging sick cells and things like that.
So is the device very interesting looking? Does it look like something you would see like a tuning fork?
I use a variety of devices actually. One is if you can imagine, visualize this, like a little fat mobile phone, but with like a radar screen on it. This is the very latest fourth generation Russian device, which is actually, it has to be built in a satellite factory. It has such a broad range of harmonic frequencies, because it's very important that these frequencies work with the body, and that has biofeedback drawn linked in. I always also use a laser, something called a soft laser, and mine was produced in the US, and it's another absolutely incredible device. And I use other things which are related to the area as well. So I deal with about 4 or 5 different things, though I've experienced over 25 modalities over the years.
I understand you've had some remarkable healing stories, both in person and, of course, you outlined several in your book. Can you kind of share a few of these stories with us?
Sure. Well, the first one was terrifying, actually, because this is the first time I dealt with someone who had a serious problem. And this was a lady in her 50s who had been a very good sportswoman, apparently, a winter sportswoman, and she was confined to a wheelchair after a stroke. So I went up to visit her, and I treated her with a first generation electrical device. So we connect this to the skin. It's not painful. You can get a tingle off it, a buzz, and usually it's quite pleasant as well. And I treated her for about, I would say, 40 to 50 minutes using a special process called a protocol. And the first thing she did after that treatment was stand up out of her wheelchair and balance on what had been her bad leg. And I've got this. I need to put this into context. You can get these incredible results, sometimes very early, but often very late in a healing process. But it doesn't always happen like that. I need to be, I think, quite precise about the language, because depending on the body and the situation, sometimes we need several treatments to make a big difference like that. But that was certainly one of them. Another one was actually in a pub in Liverpool, and this guy didn't even tell me what the problem was. I did this brushing technique on his arm. I won't go into the details of why we do that, but we're picking up nerve inflammation. He got very excited after a few minutes, and I guess after 7 or 8 minutes in total, I said, "Okay, what's going on?" And he said, "I can feel my leg properly again." Okay, how did it feel before? Numb and tingly. Right. Why? I broke my back. When did you break your back? 26 years ago. And he told me how this numbness had gone in the space of a few minutes. And he said, he followed up by saying, "I can't wait to go home and jump in the bath tonight, because I've had a powerful electric shock from that leg every time I've jumped in the bath for the last 26 years." And I managed to follow up with that a few years later. And yes, that was completely resolved in a few minutes. But it doesn't always happen like that. But I've seen many results that people would consider to be miraculous, because the body didn't have the right energy or the information to do what it does. So the body is the miracle in this situation. We're just providing tools that assist the body to do its job so well.
My goodness, what profound results. And I understand that you also treated someone with a leg ulcer.
Yes, that's right. I've treated 2 ladies with the leg ulcers. The first time I used a previous generation device and a laser, because one of the things we specialize in is putting the studies together, but also studying and putting different approaches together for better results. And that took about, I think, 6 or 7 months, something like that. The second time managed to be resolved in, I think it was about 2 weeks. And that was really quite profound, using a later generation device. And both ladies were delighted, because the first one was saying the pain was so bad she couldn't sleep at night.
Oh my gosh. That's just so remarkable. I think a lot of people, when they hear these types of healings, they may be a little skeptical about, rapid healing results. What would you say to somebody who thinks, well, these stories might be too good to be true?
I agree. It's good to be skeptical. In fact, I love treating skeptics because the beauty is the devices don't care what people think. However, this is such an important point. This area is exploding in interest, and a lot of people are jumping in on the basis of memes and very poor and potentially dangerous information. So we have collected links together to PubMed, the US Department of Health website, and others, to over 300,000 studies in a variety of frequency healing technologies. So we've got that base of science, which I feel is very important from all around the world. And then the second thing that we do is we create the case studies. We gathered the evidence for that, including time-stamped images, X-rays of bone regeneration, ophthalmic charts in one case, and I also put them in the front of two of the three books that I produced as a series. So there's quite a lot of evidence in those books to explain how they work with injuries, illnesses, emotional traumas, but also things like improving sports performance. So Olympic gold medalists use these devices to improve their performance. Business people, yeah, they've got a wide variety of applications, actually, because we are energy beings ultimately. But I think skeptics are right to be skeptical. There are too many fake things in the world. There are fake books. There are people who produce poor devices. And I think that's a very powerful skill of discernment, to ask good questions. And I always encourage that.
Well, so let's go over your three books of frequency healing. Can you share them with us?
Sure. So it's called the Frequency Healing series on Amazon. The first one is just a little beginner's guide. It does give some examples, but it explains how the devices work. It talks about 9 different categories of types of frequency healing. It goes into 80 different modalities within those categories, because some of them work very differently from each other. So people have different requirements, and this is the first thing to recognize. So people are often asking, what device should I get? And I always say, what do you want to deal with? So it deals with navigating those issues, and it gives people some very powerful questions to ask, because I've met people who've invested thousands in technologies and never got any training with it either, which is another point. So effectively then, with the beginner's guide, is followed up by something called holistic strategy. And that covers the situation which, yeah, let's have a real honest conversation about this. This often works, frequency healing often works with the kind of devices I use 85 to 95% of the time, including with chronic illnesses. But it doesn't work all the time. So then the holistic strategy recognizes the fact that, some illnesses are rooted in deficiencies, for example. We might have had toxic events. There are other imbalances in the body. What are the kind of things that we can do to stack the odds in favor of someone? And I've had some very good reports from people about this alone. So, and this is also rooted in science in terms of things like fasting and triggering autophagy. So that's the home healers kind of stuff to support the strategy. And then the final book is really the masterclass on frequency healing. It's a much bigger book. It has much more evidence, a lot more details about the devices and how to use them as well.
So, are these books geared to help people also learn how to use frequency healing and to be able to do this at home?
In broad terms, yes, but not specifically, because I can't claim to be an expert in all of the different approaches that people use. So this is where I say, we've got broad guidelines here, and the problem is the market's taking off without paying attention to these guidelines. So, for example, everyone's body is different. Everybody's body is different every day. So there is what we would call a dosage with these technologies, assuming we're using the right frequencies. So not enough is not enough, but too much actually goes into something called the biphasic switch response, which means, first of all, if you go past the optimum, then all the treatment is undone. So if you've had pain and it's gone away, it's all going to come back. And it may feel worse because your calibration point is now the zero that you achieved somewhere along the way. But if you continue past that point, then you're into something called oxidative stress, which is biological damage to cells and even the DNA. We need to think about dosage. We need to think about treatment intervals. We need to think about something called tolerance, where it's like if we play the same movie every day to someone, even if it's their favorite, they're going to switch off to it eventually. And the same thing can happen with frequencies. So it's much more about the basic rules and getting them in place for people, and then their choices so that they're well prepared for whatever kind of frequency modality they decide is right for their particular situation. But we don't go into the absolute details of, for example, how to use tuning forks. What we would say is find someone who really knows the subject area and then go to them for training, because there's no point in someone like myself trying to copy someone who's been doing that for, say, 10 or 20 years. I'll never do as good a job as they can at that.
Well, I know that you emphasize that disease is often a suspended adaptive response rather than something that needs to be directly attacked. Can you share on that with us?
Certainly. So this is based on the experience of remission. So we know when someone has a particular type of chronic illness that they can go into remission. And the general assumption, I think, is that, oh, that's great, the illness has gone away. However, our experience with using the frequency healing technologies is that if we treat in remission, the first thing that happens is the body wakes up and it manifests all of the symptoms. So we would then view remission as being the state of the body in which it's at its lowest possible ebb. It either lacks the quality of information or the energy to even raise the symptoms. And that really determines then how we deal with chronic situations. But basically, we need to consider also that, say there's a virus going around, someone either doesn't get it or gets a little light sniffle. Someone else, maybe they're feeling pretty rough for a few days. But a third person with the same root cause may really have quite a significant problem. So what we recognize is that these technologies help the body to run through its healing process, which involves adaptation, recognizing there's an issue, adapting to it, dealing with it much more quickly. So our aim is to accelerate that process. And in fact, if we deal with, some kind of a virus or a common cold or something like that, there are certain points that we can treat on the body. If we treat them early enough, then, as soon as we've got that itchy, peppery feeling in our nose, we can do a few minutes treatment, and very often that will go away and will not progress in the way that your family in the same house or your colleagues at work or whatever start to suffer with something that turns out to be a bit bigger than that. So the whole aim is to help the body to complete its normal process, which is, I recognize there's a problem, I'm going to adapt to that. The adaptation could involve something like a fever, but ultimately it's going to run through that cycle in record time if we can give it the right energy and information.
So, for someone starting out, what's your most important recommendations?
Knowledge is power. Find out about the technologies first of all. So if I go back to the books on this point, I did a little survey on Amazon recently, and there's under 300 books on energy healing and under 160 on frequency healing. I found one book of all of those dealing with 10 different modalities. And all the others, there were another 6 on that list, had 4 or less. So this is why I've put 80 modalities into the books under 9 different sections. So find out what's possible. Look at the evidence, be critical, look at the studies. Then decide what you want to deal with, and then find out what's possible through the books. And then ultimately, you can also get in touch through the books. My details are put in the back of the books, but also through our website. and we talk to people. We're here to help people as a non-profit. So we talk to people all the time. And so get good information, then you're going to make good decisions for your particular budget and your particular situation.
So you mentioned that we've talked about different applications and different treatments that have helped people with certain diseases, but does it also help with like emotional trauma and mental clarity, maybe even getting better clarity and creativity and energy?
Very much so. Because how often have we woken up in the morning? Maybe, we've had a party the night before or something, and then we've got a work commitment and we've just pushed things a little bit too hard, and we wake up feeling sluggish in the morning. Well, that's an energy function. It takes a while for our bodies to get going. So, yeah, these technologies are being applied for all sorts of different situations because our brain's running on energy as well. So emotional traumas are also connected to this, and in fact, devices at the high end are being used for things like depression. So there is a device, it's very, very specialist. It is a frequency healing device. And this process is called transcranial magnetic stimulation. Some of the best devices in the world come from the US, and they're being applied for very severe depression. So that the cases that nothing else has fixed, and that works in 70% of cases. But those devices cost at the top end because they're using MRIs. They cost $5 or $6 million. Well, we know through other approaches that we can approach, the same kind of issues as well. So emotional traumas can be dealt with energetically also. And what we know from PTSD, for example, is that someone who's had a very, very terrible, traumatic, stressful event is basically stuck in hyperprocessing in the brain. We can measure this with EEGs. And so devices are being used to deal with that kind of situation as well. So it's an early stage actually with frequency healing. Evidence is still being gathered, but a variety of devices are being used for all sorts of emotional traumas and psychological events and stuff. But we do know as well this is very, very intimately connected to brain physiology. So if someone has PTSD, it actually modifies the brain in a physical sense. So we can approach that problem back through the physics of the brain and through energy.
So you've mentioned before about stacking different modalities. Can you explain what some of those are and why they provide some of the most powerful combinations you've seen and why they work so well together?
That's a great question, Marianne. So the first thing is that we can't mix everything together. If we use something like Reiki or Bowen therapy or something like that in the morning, and then we try something like Scanar, which is another one of these Russian devices, in the evening, we can very easily trigger a healing crisis, which is typically something that comes on very quickly. It can involve a lot of shivering, shaking, nausea, faintness, things like that. So there's a bit of an art in a way to finding synergistic modalities. So we particularly like smooth modalities, things that work very gently with the body, and they can be quite powerful. And this is not always related to more energy, though. As a general rule, if we're supplying the right energy, the more we supply or the more powerful it is, the shorter we need to treat and the quicker we can get the effects. But there is like an energetic sweet spot to that. So the best options we've found with the electrical adaptive stimulators, as they're known, include soft lasers, things called healing blankets, which again come from the Russian space program. They have a dual effect, we believe. One is that they help to reduce the amount of external disturbing, unnatural EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, from things like mobile phones and Wi-Fi routers, because they're not natural. They disturb the cell biology. So if we can reduce that through these blankets, that helps. So these blankets generally have a sheet of very thin, very conductive metal in the middle of them. But they feel just like a normal blanket because they're surrounded by a natural thick cotton padding. But there's a second effect from them, which is that back to this principle of the cells producing light in the form of biophotons, then if you can measure that and it extends out of the body, so anything with an electrical element to it also projects energy outside it. So what seems to happen with these blankets is that actually they act as an energetic mirror as well. They seem to conserve energy. They seem to reflect it back to the body. They seem to strengthen the body's biofield and fill in gaps of the biofield. There are other things, very, very cheap things in some cases, where we can use certain frequencies and certain relaxation techniques, like something called the triad wave and the reset breath and quiet touch. That's also very, very powerful. So not all of these things need to be expensive. Another one's hydrogen therapy. So a nutritionist who's listening might go, hey, that's a nutritional thing, the way I look at it. But it also facilitates electron transfer in the body because a healthy gut produces 100 liters of bioavailable hydrogen a day. So it's also working energetically. So those are some of the things that we're putting together and seeing these are all fabulous on their own, actually. But when you start to combine these things, because they're so different, we can get even better, even faster results when we use them in the right way.
Let's dive into this a little bit more. I'm sure many people want to make an appointment with you. You're in Austria. I'm sure folks fly out to see you all the time. Do you do remote sessions and appointments as well?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I talk to people all the time if it's just talking. There are some particular features and limitations of doing things like remote healing. So now we're entering into the quantum aspect of things. So we go a little bit into that science as well and how things are connected and how we can tap into that and some of the explanations for those effects. So the answer is yes. I talk to people all the time. It's usually much better than having an email conversation, and occasionally get involved in remote healing, though I also teach that in the third book, Frequency Healing, Energy Healing.
Well, and it also gives people an excuse to have an appointment with you in Austria, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, my goodness. I mean, your work is just so profound. You're quite candid about the problems with conventional medicine. And boy, I mean, we can go there, but I don't know if we have enough time for that in one conversation today. So, how do you see frequency healing and holistic approaches fitting into the current medical system we have?
It's in some cases it's niching in some areas. So like the TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, it's starting to creep in. Certain lasers are starting to creep in. There's some adoption there from things like top sports clubs. But it tends to be, from what I know of it, quite niche at the moment because the doctors aren't even educated very well in things like nutrition, which I think is a scandal, actually. But let's be fair to doctors as well and say that, there's this marvelous thing called modern trauma medicine, which is, absolutely incredible when you need it as well. So let's give them, full credit for that. But unfortunately, medical training is very much dominated by the pharma industry. And this is very much a competitor to what they're doing. And the thing is, if they keep their heads stuck in the sand, what's going to happen is that the public adoption, which is growing tenfold over the next 10 years and already going crazy, is simply going to leave them behind. So there are already doctors and clinicians, as well as home users, adopting these technologies. So I think it's just going to go past them, and they will either have to adapt to it and get involved with it, or maybe they'll be finished in a few years.
I know there is a huge push to look at things in a more holistic way. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I love how your books cover like quantum perspective, biofields, linguistic wave, genetics, and even remote healing, which we've been kind of touching on. Where do you see the intersection of science and consciousness in frequency healing?
Whoa, that is such a profound question. I remember reading a book many years ago called The Dancing Wooly Masters. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was talking about this intersection of what you might call spirituality and science. And really, what it's founded on are the miracles of the body and the miracles of the universe. So there is some explanation starting to be brought into this area, and we cover on some of this technology and some of these explanations in the books as well. But yeah, we're living in a. I'll tell you what, Marianne. I sometimes wake up and I feel like I've woken up in the middle of a cross between an all-action adventure movie and a Walt Disney cartoon, because this universe that we've been brought into is amazing in the way that it operates. So yeah, we're living in a miraculous vehicle, actually, the human body.
I love hearing how the human body has this great ability to heal itself just with the right direction and having the right tools. Have you found that certain like personality traits or mindsets or habits influences a person's healing journey regardless of the technology that's being used?
It can do. There is an issue called secondary gain, which is where subconsciously or unconsciously, someone might find that they get more attention, more love, more appreciation, more caring from other people when they're sick. And that can be quite a deep-rooted program. But the beauty about the kind of devices I work with is that they generally don't care what someone thinks. They just get on with the healing process. And if it is connected to an emotional issue, then that seems to be undone in rather a similar way to the way that chronic illnesses are undone, which is like peeling back the layers of an onion. The last problem is dealt with, then the problem before, then the problem before. And that can be a bumpy journey depending on which technologies you're using. It can lead to something called a healing crisis, or it can be quite a smooth sort of journey where you recall things of the past that maybe you'd forgotten before that were quite traumatic. But it's like they're coming back into consciousness, and the emotional connection to those memories is softened and then undone effectively.
Throughout your career, what has been the most challenging case you've worked on? And I know you shared the first one with us that sounded quite just impactful.
Mm. Phew. Yeah, I'll tell you, Marianne. The issue is that um, with the kind of things that we deal with as an organization, and myself as the president of that organization, um, very often we're operating right at the limits of what's possible and in a grey area. And we don't know what's possible. It's according to conventional medicine, a lot of the chronic illnesses that we deal with are things that can't be resolved, but we know are resolved in the great majority of cases. And but we get people coming to us who've, for example, got something like kidney failure, and conventional medicine would call this a non-functional situation. The fact is, we don't know exactly where a non-functional situation lies. So what we have to do in that situation is really to quite carefully, to the best of our ability, um, tick off all the boxes. So I describe this like I think the game in the US is called Clue. We call it Cluedo in the US. So we have to line up all the most important suspects and tick them off our list. And unfortunately, most people aren't in the position of being able to put all of the very best technologies together to deal with a specific situation. So the answer is we don't know in some cases, and we have to make best guesses and try and deal with that. And we just don't know what a true non-functional situation is in this case. But I certainly deal with people who've got things like cancer sometimes, and try and give them. So this is access to studies and things like that that are put into the books. So there's some phenomenal research coming from the US at the moment with respect to melatonin for cancer. So we talk about issues like that, but our job is really to empower people with information and help them to stack the odds. But we've got to recognise that sometimes it may not work. So, but that's quite a stressful side of this sometimes, because we want to get the very, very best results for everybody that we try to help.
Oh, I'm sure. My goodness. And for those healthcare professionals, the clinicians who are very curious about frequency healing, what would you encourage them to explore first?
Um, the books have really been written for you folks, but also for anyone who's interested at home. So I would survey the landscape first of all. I'd find out what's possible. I'd find out the different approaches because some of them are completely opposite. For example, bioresonance diagnostics is a diagnostic modality, again out of the Russian space program, and they send frequencies into the body like an opera singer singing a note to shatter a glass. So we can use resonances to shatter viruses, parasites, bacteria, and fungi. But the kind of devices I specialize in do completely the opposite. They're non-diagnostic. They are just sending in frequencies to assist and support the body in healing itself. So this is where it can get a little bit baffling, and why we should sort of have a priority and understand what's possible. So the information is the best place to start, and then deciding, okay, what do I want to achieve and what's my budget?
So, what questions would you hope that researchers ask you today about the field of frequency healing moving forward?
We need much better studies. One thing that I found out recently absolutely shocked me, actually, which is back to that effect that I described earlier, which is about the individualized dose and something called the biphasic switch response. And what I found was, because I was very intrigued, why aren't these devices really being adopted in a big way by the top sports clubs, for example, for performance enhancement, not just recovery from injuries and things like that? And why? So I looked at the data for this. Thousands of studies, tens of thousands of studies, have all been built on the basis of using standardized treatments. And that's when the light bulb went on for me, which is, well, they're suboptimal in that case. That explains why when one team is doing shuttle relay sprints, they might get a 3% improvement in their performance by the time they're doing their ninth run or something. And another team is only getting 0.3%. So that really means that the whole scientific basis of those studies is built on a flawed premise. So we need much more in the way of studies and big data to do with this. Or we need a new innovation to be able to gather the data together, which I also cover in the main book, Frequency Healing, Energy Healing.
What do you believe is some of the most exciting innovations that you've seen that deserve more attention?
Mm. Um, yeah, the particular thing that I'm just lucky enough, I think, to have stumbled across is the electrical adaptive stimulators, because they're just absolutely unbelievable. But I think we can in some way, hybridize some of the lessons from these technologies, so that we can build proper biologically based dosing into a range of other devices. And ultimately, I think we're looking at an approach which integrates these things. So the favorite, because I'm comparing this against things known as ablating lasers. So you can use these devices also for reducing wrinkles and skin improvements and stuff. And so we call that cosmetology. And one version is an ablating laser, which actually strips away the top layer of skin. So it's really, I would call that borderline invasive. And those things cost, 50, sorry, no, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So not always is it the situation where if we spend more, we're getting better. And the more I make comparisons with things like TMS costing potentially millions of dollars, and these devices, the more I realize I think these particular little devices are an absolute bargain. And I think they're superior, actually, in many respects, due to the range of frequencies and the sophistication of the biofeedback they employ. So it's not always a case of a bigger spend getting better results.
When people have come to you after exhausting conventional treatment options, how do you approach evaluating their situation?
Yeah, we have a structure for this, which is a series of calibration questions going into everything from their environment and their lifestyle habits through to injuries and illnesses and other things that have happened through their life, and then what's the main problem at the moment ultimately. And that creates a key decision making point, because if it's just something like an injury, we can put a device like a laser or a an electrical adaptive stimulator directly over that point, or we can treat slightly less directly through treating a mirror point or brushing an arm or something like that. But when it comes to the chronic issues, then we have specific steps treating the body as a whole system that we need to use. So there are various approaches for various different situations that we need to apply for people to get the best results. And then from then on, we're mixing it up. We're dealing with what we call the main complaint here and now. And then we're going back and we're using protocols to treat the gut for autoimmune issues, the spine for chronic issues and autoimmune issues, etc. So this is where it becomes a little bit more of an art and a science at the same time to get the very best out of the technologies, because the body thrives on variety. And if we keep approaching it in the same way, it's kind of like saying, whatever your favorite meal is, you're going to get it every meal, for the next 3 weeks, and it's not going to respond so well to that kind of approach.
Now, I know you've been doing this for so long and working with so many different types of equipment. Would you say that your approach, because it sounds you have like a very scientific approach to how you deal with every new client, is that a little bit intuitive, a little bit of wisdom, a little bit both?
Well, we have to really, if we're going to scale this, we have to empower people to be able to do this at home or in a clinic, if they're a clinician or a doctor in their surgery. So we have created an approach which really is mostly through remote training, so through videos, but also quizzes, effectively, like a little examination, but also being able to access that information easily, but also having the key stuff printed down on cards so someone can read out the contraindications for a particular device, for example, and then these calibration questions and stuff like that. So what that means is that we've extracted the memory issue out of the equation as much as possible. And that means also that they can nail the quality first time, because very often we're dealing with elderly people, people who have memory issues. They may be under tremendous stress. They might be ill themselves. They might have had a traumatic brain injury. And we need to be able to make the path as easy and safe and straightforward as possible for them. And then that's not all. That's just our minimum quality baseline. After that, then they're positively encouraged to get in touch with me at any time. And I'm also backed up by doctors in the background as well, because I need to be aware of what my limits are in this situation. But ultimately, then they can get absolutely direct support for whatever they're trying to deal with, and that's really important to nail down the quality, but also to make sure that it's easy for ordinary human beings to be able to do this.
So, for folks that maybe, and we talked about skeptics initially that are going through the process and going, gosh, I don't know if I believe this, but I'm going to keep doing it because they're in a really desperate place. What kind of results have you seen from them being able to make these shifts?
Well, very often tested with these technologies. So the case I told you earlier about the guy with the problem with the leg as a result of the broken back didn't tell me what the issue was. Another one happened in Bali a few years ago, where this guy just came up and asked for a treatment. So I treated him on certain points on the face. And using that device, that was literally about a minute or so. And after about 30 or 40 seconds, he went, stop, stop. And I was, I'm worried by this stage. What's wrong? And he said, no, no, nothing's wrong. He said, all my pain's just gone. So I said, okay, why did you have pain? And he said, well, I popped a rib out weight training yesterday, so I was in actually quite a lot of pain. He didn't tell me about it, but this is the beauty of it is if you've got really good equipment and you can use it in the right way, and often that's very simple and quite intuitive, then you can get results in that kind of situation. And yeah, that's partly why I love treating skeptics, because I like the fact that they're being honest. That's great. I value that. I don't treat it as a challenge or anything like that. And but it's like their eyes are opened and their mind is opened after they've experienced an event like this, and they realize, well, it can't have been a placebo, because that's another thing that we need to cover with these technologies, because I honestly didn't believe it was going to happen. So that's a lovely thing to experience, actually.
Oh my goodness. What a great story. And thank you for sharing that with us. Where would you like our readers and listeners to go to learn more about your three books and the work you do and be part of your community?
Oh, I would love that. So the first thing is, very simply, you can either put Michael Upstone or Frequency Healing Series into the search box in Amazon, and all my books are going to pop straight to the top there. The other option, and you can contact me through the back of each book. This is a key part of what we do, is treating people like people and giving them the one-to-one support and encouraging their questions and things like that. The other way is to go to keephealthresearch.org. So Keep Health Research is all one word. And we've got a page of evidence. We've got links to studies. We've got some videos, including people giving their testimonials, an overview of how the body works and how the technologies work with the body as well. And if you get in touch with me through the website, then we can set up a call as well. I much prefer talking with people actually than emailing if possible, because we can have a better quality of conversation, and we can go into the nuances and the details more effectively, I think.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your books, Frequency Healing. Make sure to visit his website at keephealthresearch.org for more information on his work, also his three books, and to be part of his community. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.